Why were the Norwood Crew murdered? The three murdered men had accumulated no shortage of enemies over the years. Their violent reputations, drug operations, and intimidation tactics had left a trail of broken trust and simmering resentment. Essex detectives found themselves juggling multiple lines of inquiry, but one stood out early on. In November 1994, a 28-year-old man named Kevin Whitaker was found dead at the side of a road, having apparently overdosed on heroin. But from the beginning, the circumstances were suspicious. Whitaker had vanished from his parents' home after receiving a flurry of phone calls from Dean Rolston. He left on November 17th, telling no one where he was going. 30 hours later, his body was found needle marks in his arm and no signs of a struggle. The coroner ruled it an overdose, and at the Chelmsford inquest, Rolston denied even knowing him. But when investigators presented an itemized phone bill showing multiple calls between Rolston and Whitaker, he was forced to backtrack. Whitaker's parents were devastated. That's when Marie Tate, mother of Pat Tate, began speaking out. She claimed her son told her while recovering in hospital from a gunshot wound that Whitaker had been injected with ketamine, a powerful animal tranquilizer often called Special K, used to immobilize victims. Once paralyzed, Tucker and Rolston allegedly injected him with lignocaine, a compound that can cause death in high doses. The body was then dumped to simulate an overdose. Marie insisted Pat had nothing to do with the killing, that he was simply caught in the middle. She believed Whitaker's friends had carried out a revenge killing, targeting Pat, Vince, and Dean a year later on that frozen lane in Haddonfield. But Detective Superintendent Deansmore disagreed. "There's no direct connection," he said. "We're confident Tucker and Rolston were involved in Whitaker's death, but the murders at Workhouse Lane? That's a separate matter." Still, rumors swirled. And as police pressure mounted, one arrest was made. A 27-year-old decorator from South London, taken into custody during a joint operation with Scotland Yard. He was charged with firearms offenses, though no murder charges were filed. Deansmore remained optimistic. "I'm satisfied with how the inquiry is progressing. I'm hopeful there will be arrests before I retire. That's how I'd like to finish a 32-year career." The case, however, was further complicated by another high-profile tragedy just a month earlier. On November 11, 1995, an 18-year-old schoolgirl from Latchington named Leah Bartlett collapsed after taking a single ecstasy MDMA pill and drinking nearly 7 liters of water in 90 minutes. She slipped into a coma and died 5 days later when her life support was turned off. Her death dominated headlines across Britain and ignited a national conversation about party drugs. In the aftermath, Essex police launched a sweeping investigation to identify the supplier of the fatal tablet. They traced the drug back to Raquel's nightclub, a popular spot in Basildon's nightlife scene. The investigation cost nearly £300,000 and led to the arrest of 4 of Leah's friends, but deeper questions lingered. It was widely rumored that Vince Tucker's gang controlled the ecstasy trade in Raquel's, raising suspicions that the Norwood Crew may have indirectly supplied the tablet that killed Leah Bartlett. For the public and the press, the line between the Leah Bartlett tragedy and the Workhouse Lane execution started to blur. In the aftermath of the murders, a powerful new theory began to gain traction, one that suggested the execution of the 3 Norwood Crew members wasn't just an underworld power play, but an act of revenge tied to the tragic death of Leah Bartlett. Many believed that the gang's connection to the ecstasy trade in Basildon, and specifically the pill that had cost the 18-year-old her life, had finally caught up with them. Someone, somewhere, had decided they had gone too far. On January 1, 1996, a significant lead arrived from outside the county. A detective from Exeter had contacted Essex police, claiming he had received information from a trusted underworld informant. The source deeply connected to the criminal networks of London, and Kent believed he knew exactly why Tucker, Tate, and Rolston were executed. A report filed that same day noted, "He has contact with a person who has a good connection with the drugs world in the London and Kent areas." This person is alleged to have taken over the work which Tate, Tucker, and Rolston were running. This work started at Christmas time and is still current. The suggestion was clear. The Norwood Crew had been forcibly removed, and someone else had stepped in to take over their operation. More chillingly, the source claimed the murders weren't just about control, they were about debt. They were shot because they owed the firm £60,000, the document stated. The same report also noted that the informant had ongoing phone inquiries that he believed were directly linked to the Workhouse Lane murders, indicating a wider network of surveillance, wiretaps, or underworld chatter feeding new leads into the investigation. The man allegedly behind the takeover was 36 years old, described as a doorman, bodybuilder type, and known to move in the same circles as the feared North London-based Adams crime family, a group with a brutal reputation for silencing rivals and collecting debts without mercy. If true, it meant Tucker, Tate, and Rolston weren't just taken out by a personal grudge or local vendetta, they were removed in a calculated, strategic hit by organized crime. And someone had already filled the vacuum they left behind. At the time of the triple murder investigation, one potential suspect was already behind bars on remand at Brixton Prison. According to intelligence reports, the man was well connected in the London drug scene, specifically tied to cocaine supply chains stretching across the southeast. He was described as a man of extreme violence with a known history of serious crime. Investigators believed he may have been involved in the shooting murder of a man named Martin in Rotherhithe, as well as the attempted stabbing murder of another man, Marcus Williams, at a London youth club. His name began surfacing more frequently as the inquiry into the Norwood Crew murders intensified. Then, in February 1996, Essex police received new information from an unexpected source, a woman named Linda Millard. Originally from Essex, she came forward after confiding in a friend, expressing her growing suspicions about a man she had spent time around shortly after the murders. While staying at a friend's home, Mrs. Millard overheard the man on the phone, reacting to the breaking news of the triple homicide. Something about his tone, his language, and his timing struck her as odd to familiar to calm. It was as if he already knew what had happened, or worse, had been involved. A police report summarized her account. She thought he had some knowledge of involvement in the killings. The man in question was living in Dorset at the time, but maintained 4 or 5 properties in Essex, along with a known residence in Dorset. According to Millard, he frequently traveled to Portugal, suggesting possible international connections, a red flag for organized crime detectives. Though her claims were largely anecdotal, the details were compelling enough to expand the scope of the inquiry, especially given the mounting pressure on Essex police to identify suspects before the gangland fallout turned even bloodier. The deeper detectives dug, the more it became clear the execution of the Norwood Crew wasn't a random act of violence, it was part of a broader, coordinated criminal realignment involving dangerous people with much to lose. The police report went on to detail further claims made by Linda Millard. She believed the man she had overheard was deeply involved in the criminal underworld, not just in drugs, but in the funding and distribution of counterfeit perfumes and pornographic videos, a common side stream revenue for organized crime figures during the 1990s. While staying at her friend's home in Dorset, Millard quietly passed evidence to investigators, documents, notes, and details she had collected over several days. Roughly 10 days after her arrival, her world took a sudden and chilling turn. On March 1, 1996, the man she had named in her statement allegedly found out where she was staying. That same day, Linda Millard vanished without a trace. Her car was discovered later that afternoon, parked near the edge of the cliffs at Battery Point, Portishead, a remote, windswept spot just outside Bristol. Her shoes, handbag, and car keys were found locked in the boot. There was no note, no sign of a struggle, and no sign of Linda. It had been nearly 3 months since the execution of the Norwood Crew, and only days since Millard had come forward with her suspicions. Though police treated the case as a missing person inquiry, Her family were adamant that suicide was never a possibility. She was scared, one relative later told reporters. But she wasn't running from her life, she was trying to help. To this day, no body has ever been found, and Linda Millard remains missing. But for those closest to the investigation, her disappearance was no coincidence. It was a chilling reminder that the people involved in the Haddonfield murders were dangerous and still watching. 2 days after Linda Millard disappeared, Avon and Somerset police notified their counterparts in Essex about her allegations. But by then, it was too late. Millard was gone, and whatever she might have known died with her, or vanished alongside her. A man whose name did not appear in the public version of the police report, a former Essex business associate of the suspect Millard had named, spoke anonymously to reporters. The two had once been involved in property development, including a planned project in Portugal. "I haven't seen him in about 15 years, the man said. He was supposed to join me in a development deal overseas, but pulled out. I know the police spoke to him, but far as I know, he hadn't done anything wrong. He wouldn't be involved in something like that." Still, he conceded that the man had an interest in pornography, echoing Millard's earlier claims about his ties to drugs, adult film production, and counterfeit goods. A spokeswoman for Essex police later confirmed the suspect had voluntarily cooperated with their investigation. "During inquiries, we spoke to a man who allowed a search of his home. No evidence of wrongdoing was found and no further action was taken." The case of Linda Millard's disappearance remains an active missing person investigation. Meanwhile, the case began to take stranger turns. Even Paul Bartlett, father of Leah Bartlett and a retired Metropolitan Police firearms officer, was briefly pulled in for questioning over the triple homicide. "I nearly got nicked for the murders," Bartlett later told the press. "At the time, I was running a clay pigeon shooting business. The police seized all my guns. But I'd never even heard of the 3 murdered blokes." Then came a dramatic confession from Billy Jasper, a known armed robber and longtime gangster based in London. During an interview with detectives following his arrest, Jasper claimed he had acted as the getaway driver in the Haddonfield murders. According to him, he was paid £5,000 to drive a hitman known only as Mr. D to the isolated farm track on the night of the killings. But despite the confession, Jasper was never charged, and his account was never fully corroborated. Around the same time, police uncovered a potentially major clue. A massive haul of cannabis worth an estimated £500,000 had been found submerged in a pond on a farm in West Haddonfield. The discovery was made by local farmer Jens Hostrup, who noticed several suspicious black packets floating just beneath the surface. In total, 53 sealed bundles were recovered by Essex Police's underground search unit, who believed the packages had been dropped from an aircraft. To Detective Superintendent Deansmore, the connection was obvious. "I strongly believe there was a link between the cannabis found in West Haddonfield and the murders of Tucker, Tate, and Rolston," he said. "Was the murder over a botched drug shipment, a debt left unpaid? Or was it a power play to seize control of the operation?" Whatever the answer, the deeper detectives dug, the murkier the underworld became and the more dangerous it was to pull on the wrong thread. What was Operation Century? The investigation into the Haddonfield executions soon took a far darker and more controversial turn when Essex police launched a covert operation known as Operation Sentinel. The strategy was masterminded by Detective Superintendent Howard Deansmore, with covert support from members of the Royal Ulster Constabulary's Special Branch. The goal of Operation Sentinel was not to arrest suspects, but rather to apply psychological pressure to individuals believed to have inside knowledge about the murders of Tucker, Tate, and Rolston. The timing of the operation, February 1996, was no accident. It coincided with the Canary Wharf bombing, a high-profile act that marked the renewal of the Irish Republican Army's bombing campaign on British soil. Though there was no link between the IRA and the Haddonfield murders, Essex and RUC Special Branch operatives used the public fear surrounding the bombing as a convenient cover to initiate a disturbing deception campaign. Under the guise of Irish Republican drug traffickers, special branch officers based in Belfast made a series of anonymous and threatening phone calls to the families and associates of the murdered men. They claimed that the Norwood Crew had been backed by Irish funding and that the debts left behind were still outstanding and would be collected one way or another. Victims of these calls, already grieving and fearful, were subjected to graphic, foul-mouthed threats, including references to violence against children. One former officer later admitted that the language used could easily have been interpreted as a death threat. One such victim was Donna Jaggers, the longtime partner of Dean Rolston and mother to his child. Still reeling from his brutal murder, Jaggers was terrified when she began receiving calls from men claiming to be Republican gunmen, demanding payment and threatening her family. Panicked, she turned to Essex police for help, only to be told that the calls were indeed coming from Belfast, but that the police were unable to monitor the suspect's movements on the mainland. She was never told the calls were fake. The implication was clear: the danger was real, and it was near. The experience had a profound psychological impact on Jaggers, who was already navigating trauma and the burden of single parenthood. She later described the tactics as cruel, manipulative, and terroristic in their own right. As the truth behind Operation Sentinel eventually leaked, it became clear that the methods used were not only unethical, they were illegal. The operation yielded no useful intelligence, failed to produce cooperation, and risked irreparably damaging the credibility of the investigation. It was a gamble, and one that Detective Superintendent Deansmore would come to regret. Who killed the Norwood Crew? In May 1996, nearly 6 months after the execution-style murders of Tucker, Tate, and Rolston, a major break in the case finally came, but not from murder leads. Instead, it emerged during a joint police and customs sting targeting drug importation along the English coast. During the operation, 3 men were arrested on suspicion of large-scale drug trafficking. Among them were 52-year-old Martin Steele, 33-year-old Jason Whalley, and a third man, convicted fraudster Darren Nichols. What initially appeared to be a straightforward smuggling case soon spiraled into something much bigger. As investigators dug deeper, Steele and Whalley were quietly linked to the Haddonfield triple murders. And when Nichols realized he might be facing murder charges himself, he began to talk. Nichols told police he had first met Steele, Whalley, and Pat Tate years earlier, during a prison sentence at Hollingsea Bay Open Prison in Suffolk, where he was serving time for distributing counterfeit banknotes. According to his statement, they had all bonded over shared ambitions and criminal connections. After his release, Nichols claimed he joined Steele's smuggling enterprise, taking on the role of courier and driver. His assignments included frequent trips to Amsterdam, where he would purchase bulk quantities of cannabis, sometimes hundreds of kilos at a time. Once the deals were done, Nichols would drive the loads to the Belgian coast, where he'd rendezvous with Steele's speedboat, a fast-moving craft modified for covert nighttime deliveries. From there, the drugs were smuggled across the channel under the cover of darkness, landing on the Essex coastline, and distributed across the southeast through an established network. What began as a cannabis ring now appeared to be the logistical engine behind a much deadlier criminal conspiracy, and Nichols, seeing no way out, became the state's key witness. The case is far from over. Stay tuned for Part 3.